The cabin stood alone in the woods, surrounded by towering pines and the whispers of the wind. It was a place of solitude, a retreat for those seeking an escape from the chaos of life. But for those who knew the stories, it was a place best avoided. Jenna and her friends, Mark and Lila, had heard the rumors. The cabin was haunted, they said, cursed by the tragic events that had unfolded years ago. Intrigued, they decided to rent it for the weekend, convinced that the tales were merely fiction meant to scare city dwellers like themselves. When they arrived, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the wooden structure. It had an air of neglect, the paint peeling and the windows clouded with grime. But inside, it was cozy enough, with a fireplace that begged for a fire and a rustic charm that felt inviting. They unpacked their bags and settled in, excited for a weekend of adventure. Lila, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes at the warnings they'd heard. "Ghosts aren't real," she declared as she flicked on her phone to look up the cabin's history. "It's just an old place with a bad reputation." Mark chuckled, tossing a log into the fireplace. "Let's just have some fun. We can do the ghost hunting thing later, right?" Jenna felt a thrill of excitement. "What if we made our own rules? To see if we can survive the night?" Lila raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Like a set of rules we have to follow while we're here, you know, to keep the spirits at bay," Jenna suggested with a grin. Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. "Okay, I'm in. What do you have in mind?" They sat around the table, scribbling down their rules on a piece of paper. The atmosphere was light, filled with laughter and banter, but as they wrote, an odd tension hung in the air. The rules. 1. No talking about the past. Avoid discussions about what happened in the cabin. 2. Always stay in pairs. Never wander off alone. 3. Don't disturb the attic. It's off limits. 4. Keep the fire burning. A lit fire wards off darkness. 5. Respect the land. Leave no trace. Take only pictures. As they finalized their list, a chill swept through the room. Jenna glanced toward the window, where shadows danced in the fading light. "Maybe we should have done some research first," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Lila dismissed her fears with a wave of her hand. "Come on, it's just a cabin. We'll be fine." That night, they gathered around the fireplace, the flames crackling and casting flickering shadows across the walls. They shared stories and joked about their rules, but as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to settle over them. "Did you hear that?" Mark asked suddenly, his voice dropping to a whisper. Jenna froze, her heart racing. "What?" "It sounded like footsteps," he said, leaning closer to the window. Lila rolled her eyes. "It's probably just a deer or something. You know how the woods are." But Jenna wasn't so sure. She glanced at the darkened corners of the room, the way the shadows seemed to stretch and shift. It was just the three of them in the cabin, but the air felt thick, almost electric. As the clock struck midnight, Jenna decided to grab a blanket from the attic. She remembered the rule about not disturbing it, but the chill in the air made her uneasy. "I'll be quick," she assured her friends, slipping out of the warm light of the fire and into the dim hallway. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, each step echoing ominously. She reached the attic door, its old wood splintering at the edges. With a deep breath, she turned the knob and pushed it open. The attic was dark, filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. Moonlight streamed through a small window, illuminating the room just enough for her to see. In the far corner stood an old trunk, its leather cracked and weathered. Curiosity got the better of her. She approached the trunk, her heart pounding. What if there were treasures inside, or maybe just old clothes? She knelt beside it, fingers trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside were yellowed papers, brittle and fragile. She picked one up, squinting to read the faded writing. It was a journal, filled with frantic scribbles and drawings. But one entry caught her attention. "We should have never come here, they warned us. The spirits want to be left alone." A shiver ran down her spine. Just as she was about to close the trunk, she heard a noise behind her, a soft creaking, like footsteps approaching. Panic surged within her. She slammed the trunk shut and bolted for the door, racing down the stairs and back to the warmth of the fire. "Jenna, what's wrong?" Lila asked, concern etched on her face. I just felt something up there," Jenna stammered, her heart racing. "It felt wrong." Mark exchanged a glance with Lila. "Maybe we should just stick to the rules, huh?" As the night wore on, they struggled to shake off the unease. They played games, but laughter felt hollow, the shadows creeping closer as if the cabin itself was closing in on them. When the fire began to dwindle, they took turns stoking the flames, determined to keep the darkness at bay. But as the hour grew late, fatigue set in, and the flickering light cast eerie shapes on the walls. It wasn't long before they heard it again, a soft thumping sound, like someone knocking gently on the walls. Jenna's heart raced. "Did you hear that?" Mark nodded, looking pale. "It's just the house settling. It's old, remember?" But as the night deepened, the sounds grew louder, more insistent. Lila finally stood up, her eyes narrowing. "I'm going to check it out. We can't keep pretending nothing's happening." "No, Lila, remember the rules," Jenna protested, but Lila shrugged off her concern. "I'm fine. Just stay here." Lila disappeared into the darkness, and Jenna felt a wave of dread wash over her. She glanced at Mark, who was biting his lip, clearly torn between concern and curiosity. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Jenna's anxiety mounted as she glanced at the flickering shadows, the firelight casting distorted images across the room. Finally, Lila returned, her face pale and her eyes wide. "There's something in the woods," she breathed. "I saw something moving." Mark scoffed. "Come on, it's just the wind or an animal. You can't be serious." But Lila shook her head vehemently. "No, it was like a figure, a shadow. It was watching me." Jenna's heart raced as the words sank in. "What do you mean, watching you?" "I don't know, but it felt wrong. I had to come back." Lila's voice trembled, and the warmth of the fire suddenly felt insufficient against the chill creeping into the room. As dawn broke, the world outside transformed. The sun pierced through the trees, casting dappled light on the cabin, but the unease lingered. They gathered around the table for breakfast, the tension palpable. "Maybe we should just leave," Jenna suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark frowned. "We can't just bail after one night. Let's give it another chance. We can stick to the rules, and nothing will happen." Lila looked skeptical, her eyes darting to the window. "I don't know. I feel like something's off about this place. It's like it has a mind of its own." They spent the morning exploring the woods, but even the beauty of nature couldn't shake the eerie feeling. They kept to their rules, but the atmosphere felt heavier, suffocating. Jenna couldn't shake the memory of the trunk in the attic and the warning it contained. As night approached again, they sat by the fire, the flames crackling in the silence. They shared ghost stories, their voices low and cautious, as if speaking too loudly would awaken whatever lurked in the shadows. But then, just as they were starting to feel relaxed, a loud bang echoed from the attic, followed by a chilling silence. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered, her heart racing. Lila nodded, her expression tense. "It sounded like something fell." Mark stood up, determination in his eyes. "I'll go check it out." "No, wait," Jenna called. But it was too late. He was already heading for the stairs. "What are you doing?" Lila hissed. "I'm going to see if something's up there. We can't keep ignoring it," Mark replied, the bravado in his voice wavering. Jenna exchanged a worried glance with Lila. The rules were clear, don't disturb the attic. But Mark's curiosity was too strong. They watched as he climbed the stairs, disappearing into the darkness. Minutes stretched endlessly as Jenna and Lila sat in anxious silence. The fire flickered, casting long shadows that danced ominously along the walls. "What if he's in trouble?" Lila whispered, biting her nails. "We should go after him," Jenna replied, standing up. The fear gnawed at her insides, urging her to act. They climbed the stairs together, the wooden steps creaking beneath their weight. As they reached the top, Jenna hesitated, glancing back at Lila, who looked just as terrified. "Mark?" they called out, their voices echoing in the attic. But there was no response, just the sound of their own breathing, heavy and anxious. Jenna's heart raced as she stepped into the attic. The moonlight illuminated the space, revealing the old trunk still closed in the corner. "Mark?" she called again, louder this time. "Maybe he's just looking around," Lila said, though her voice trembled. As they searched the attic, Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if the air grew thicker, heavier, the atmosphere charged with an unexplainable tension. Suddenly, they heard a soft whimper, barely audible. "Did you hear that?" Lila asked, wide-eyed. Jenna nodded, fear pooling in her stomach. "It came from over there." They moved cautiously toward the far corner, where the trunk sat ominously. The whimper grew louder, more desperate. Jenna reached out, her hand trembling as she gripped the trunk's handle. With a swift motion, she pulled it open. Inside was nothing but dust and old clothes, but the noise continued, echoing in their minds. They looked at each other, panic rising. "Where's Mark?" Jenna whispered. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. They gasped, and Jenna's heart raced as she fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Let us out," Lila cried, banging on the door. As they struggled against the heavy door, the whispers began, soft and unintelligible at first, then growing clearer, swirling around them like a fog. "You shouldn't have come here. You've disturbed us." Jenna's breath caught in her throat. "We have to get out." With a final, desperate push, she threw her weight against the door, and it flew open, knocking her to the ground. They scrambled out of the attic and down the stairs, breathless and terrified. "Mark!" Jenna shouted as they burst into the living room, but it was empty. Panic set in as they searched the cabin, calling out for him, but the only response was silence. "Where could he be?" Lila said, her voice shaking. Jenna felt a surge of dread. "We need to go outside. He might have gone out." They rushed out the door into the fading light, scanning the area around the cabin. The woods loomed ominously, shadows stretching and shifting among the trees. "Mark!" Jenna called, her voice echoing into the silence. But there was no answer. They wandered deeper into the woods, the thick underbrush scratching at their legs as they searched for any sign of their friend. The air was heavy, thick with an unsettling quiet, the kind that made every rustle sound like a whisper. "Maybe he went back to the car," Lila suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe he's hiding from whatever's out here," Jenna replied, dread pooling in her stomach. As they continued calling for Mark, a sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, causing the branches to sway ominously. Lila shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "I don't like this. We should go back." But just as they turned to head back, they heard it, a faint echoing laugh that chilled them to the bone. It was a sound that felt wrong, twisted and mocking. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered, her heart racing. Lila nodded, fear etched across her face. "We need to find Mark, now." But as they turned back toward the cabin, the laughter echoed again, this time closer. Panic surged within Jenna as they sprinted back through the trees, desperation propelling them forward. The shadows deepened around them as they ran, the path growing darker with each passing moment. Jenna could feel the weight of something pursuing them, a presence lurking just out of sight. They reached the cabin and burst through the door, slamming it shut behind them. "Mark!" they shouted, but only silence greeted them. "What do we do?" Lila said, her voice shaking. "We can't stay here." Jenna glanced around, searching for any sign of Mark. "We have to keep looking for him. He wouldn't just leave us." They decided to split up. Lila would check the lower level while Jenna took the upstairs. The idea of being alone filled Jenna with dread, but they had to find Mark. As she ascended the stairs, the darkness felt suffocating, the air thick with an oppressive energy. She hesitated at the attic door, the memory of the whispers still fresh in her mind. But she pushed it aside and opened the door. The attic was empty, and the trunk stood closed in the corner, a looming reminder of the terror they had just experienced. Jenna felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if it were calling to her. But then she heard Lila scream from downstairs, a piercing sound that sent ice through Jenna's veins. Without thinking, she bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over her own feet. "Lila!" she shouted, her heart racing as she burst into the living room. Lila was standing near the fireplace, her eyes wide with fear. It's like something is in the house with us." Jenna felt a chill creep up her spine. "What do you mean?" Before Lila could answer, the lights flickered, plunging the cabin into darkness. They gasped, clutching each other as the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, swirling around them. "Jenna!" Lila cried. "We have to get out." But just as they reached for the door, it swung open violently, revealing the dark woods outside, a haunting void where the trees seemed to close in on them. The door swung open as if beckoning them into the darkness. Jenna and Lila stood frozen, heartbeats drumming in their ears, the air thick with an otherworldly presence. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and the unsettling laughter echoed once more, chilling them to the bone. "Don't go out there," Lila cried, grabbing Jenna's arm tightly. "It's not safe." Jenna's mind raced. "We can't just stand here. Mark could be out there." But deep down, a primal fear gripped her. The woods felt alive, as if they were a part of the very darkness surrounding the cabin. "Let's check the attic again," Lila urged, her voice trembling. "Maybe he went up there." With a hesitant nod, Jenna agreed, and they backed away from the open door, leaving the night behind them. As they ascended the stairs, every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. Once inside the attic, they scanned the dimly lit room. The trunk still stood in the corner, a silent sentinel of their fears. Jenna approached it, an unsettling curiosity clawing at her. "Jenna, don't," Lila urged, but Jenna was already kneeling, her hands hovering above the trunk's handle. "What if he left us a note or something?" she murmured, steeling herself as she pulled it open. Inside lay the same dusty papers and old clothes, but now they seemed to shimmer with an unnatural glow in the dim light. Jenna's fingers brushed against a journal, and she picked it up, feeling an immediate chill course through her. "Read it," Lila said, eyes wide with anxiety. Jenna opened the journal, the pages fragile and yellowed with age. The writing was frantic, scribbled hastily. "They don't want us here. We disturbed them. We shouldn't have come back." Her heart sank as she read the words aloud. "It's warning us." "Warning us from what?" Lila whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Just then, the attic door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing like thunder in the confined space. They both jumped, and Jenna dropped the journal, her breath coming in quick gasps. "Let us out!" Lila screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Stop," Jenna urged, panic rising in her chest. "We have to calm down." But the whispers returned, swirling around them, growing louder and more insistent. "You shouldn't be here. You've disturbed the peace." Jenna pressed her hands against her ears, trying to block out the haunting voices. "We have to find a way out." She rushed to the window, but it was sealed shut, the wood warped and stubborn. Lila was still banging on the door, tears streaming down her face. "Mark, please, if you can hear us, help." But the only response was the oppressive silence that filled the attic, thick and suffocating. Desperation clawed at Jenna. She turned back to the trunk, searching for something, anything that could help them. As her hands rummaged through the contents, she felt something cold and smooth, An old amulet nestled among the dusty clothes. Jenna pulled it out, its surface shimmering faintly in the dim light. "What is that?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Jenna replied, holding it up to the light. "But maybe it's a way to protect us. It feels different." Just then, a loud thump echoed from below, followed by the sound of shuffling. Jenna's heart raced as she exchanged a worried glance with Lila. "Is that Mark?" Lila whispered. Before Jenna could respond, the attic door creaked open, revealing a dark silhouette at the bottom of the stairs. It was Mark, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Get back," he shouted, raising his hands. "Don't come any closer." "What happened?" Jenna asked, rushing toward him, but he shook his head, fear etched on his face. "I don't know. I heard something and then I felt something pulling me." He glanced over his shoulder, anxiety washing over him. "We need to leave now." "But the door was locked," Lila said, stepping closer. "How did you get in?" "I found a way around," Mark said, his voice strained. "But I think they're here. They know we're here." Jenna clutched the amulet tightly, feeling a surge of warmth from it. "Maybe this can help us," she said, holding it out. "I found it in the trunk." Mark's eyes widened as he stepped closer. "What does it do?" "I don't know," Jenna replied. "But it feels powerful." "Let's go," Lila urged, glancing nervously at the door. "We can't stay here." They hurried down the stairs, the weight of the darkness pressing in around them. As they reached the main room, they felt the air grow colder and the shadows deepened. "Where do we go?" Mark asked, his voice shaky. "The front door," Jenna said, determined. "We'll make a run for it." They flung the door open, stepping into the dim light of the evening. The forest loomed around them, dark and foreboding. A cold wind howled, making the trees creak and groan. "Which way?" Lila asked, fear evident in her eyes. "Back to the car," Mark said, pointing down the narrow path. "If we can just reach it." But as they began to run, the laughter returned, echoing through the trees, growing louder, surrounding them. The shadows seemed to reach for them, stretching impossibly long. "Run!" Jenna shouted, gripping the amulet tightly. As they sprinted, the trees appeared to shift, their branches like clawed hands trying to grasp them. Jenna could hear Lila's heavy breaths behind her and felt Mark close by. They pushed forward, adrenaline propelling them through the darkness, but the laughter echoed in their ears, taunting them. "Keep going," Jenna urged, her heart racing as the sounds of the woods grew more ominous. She could feel the presence behind them, lurking, waiting. As they rounded a bend, the headlights of their car flickered in the distance. Relief flooded through her. "There, we can make it." But just as they neared the vehicle, the ground beneath them shifted. Jenna stumbled, falling to her knees. Mark and Lila turned back, their faces filled with horror. "Jenna, come on," Mark shouted, reaching for her. Jenna scrambled to her feet, glancing back toward the cabin, and her breath caught in her throat. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, its shape indistinct but radiating an overwhelming sense of dread. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered, the voice echoing like a cold breeze. Jenna felt a surge of panic. "Run, don't look back." They sprinted for the car, the laughter growing louder, echoing in their ears. As they reached the vehicle, Jenna fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling. "Unlock it," Lila cried, glancing back nervously. Just as Jenna managed to get the door open, she felt a chill sweep over her. She turned, and the figure was closer now, its features hidden in the darkness, but its presence suffocating. "Get in," Mark shouted, shoving Lila into the back seat as he slid into the front. Jenna jumped into the passenger seat, heart racing. She slammed the door shut just as the figure reached the car, its cold breath fogging the window. "Start the engine," Lila screamed, her voice laced with terror. Mark turned the key, but the engine sputtered and died. Come on," he pleaded, turning the key again. The figure outside pressed against the window, and Jenna could see a twisted face, eyes like dark pits. A feeling of dread washed over her, paralyzing her. Suddenly, the engine roared to life, and Mark slammed the gas pedal down. The car lurched forward, and they sped away, the tires screeching against the gravel. As they tore down the dirt road, Jenna glanced back through the rearview mirror. The figure stood in the middle of the clearing, watching them, its laughter echoing through the night, chilling her to the bone. "We need to get far away from here," Lila said, her voice shaky. "We can't stop until we're out of these woods." Mark nodded, gripping the wheel tightly as they sped down the winding road. The trees loomed on either side, dark and menacing, but the laughter faded into the distance. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the main road. The cabin and its horrors were far behind them, but the lingering fear clung to them like a shadow. Jenna leaned back in her seat, breathing heavily. "Did that really just happen?" "I don't know," Mark replied, his voice strained. "But we're alive, that's what matters." Lila wiped tears from her eyes, her face pale. "We need to tell someone. People need to know about that cabin." As they drove further away, the sun began to rise, casting warm light over the landscape. But the relief was bittersweet. They all felt the weight of what they had experienced. "I can't shake the feeling that it's not over," Jenna said quietly, clutching the amulet in her pocket. Mark frowned. "What do you mean?" "The cabin, it's still there. Whatever we disturbed, it's still waiting." Lila shivered. "I don't want to think about it. Let's just get home." But as they drove into the dawn, Jenna knew this wasn't the end. The shadows of the woods still whispered in her mind, and the laughter echoed in her ears, a haunting reminder of the horrors they had faced. Weeks passed, and the experience faded into a haunting memory, but Jenna found herself unable to shake the feeling of unease. The amulet remained tucked away, a constant reminder of that terrifying night. One evening, as she sat alone in her room, she felt an inexplicable urge to take it out. The moment she held it in her hands, a warmth spread through her. It pulsed with energy, and she couldn't help but wonder if it held secrets she had yet to uncover. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and searched for information about the cabin. What had happened there? What did the journal mean? Hours later, she stumbled upon an old article detailing the cabin's history. It spoke of a family who had vanished without a trace, their names eerily familiar. The words described how locals believed the cabin to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had been wronged. Suddenly, the laughter echoed in her mind, sending chills down her spine. The article ended with a warning: never return to the place where darkness dwells. Jenna's heart raced. What if the laughter wasn't just a figment of their imagination? What if it was a call, a beckoning from the woods? "Jenna," her mother called from downstairs. "Dinner's ready." Jenna forced herself to set the amulet aside and join her family, but the weight of the cabin's memory lingered in her mind. That night, she lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The shadows in her room felt alive, creeping toward her, whispering secrets of a past she had tried to forget. In the weeks that followed, she began to notice strange occurrences. Objects moved, shadows flickered at the corners of her vision, and the laughter would sometimes echo softly in the silence. Was she losing her mind? Or had the darkness truly followed her home? One stormy night, as the rain poured down outside, Jenna sat at her desk, staring at the amulet. The energy it emitted felt almost palpable, pulling her toward it. The storm rattled the windows, and a bolt of lightning illuminated her room, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed from the front door, startling her. Her heart raced. Who could be out there in this weather? "Jenna," her mother called from downstairs. "Can you get that?" She hesitated, glancing at the amulet one last time before setting it down. With trepidation, she made her way downstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she approached the door, the knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Coming," she called, her voice shaky. When she opened the door, she was met with a chilling sight. Lila stood soaked to the bone, her eyes wide with fear. "Lila, what are you doing here?" Jenna exclaimed, pulling her friend inside and shutting the door against the storm. "I had to see you," Lila panted, shaking. "I've been having dreams, terrible dreams about the cabin." Jenna's heart sank. "Me too. I thought it was just me." Lila's gaze hardened. "No, it's not just dreams. I think it's trying to reach us. We need to go back." "What?" Jenna gasped, her pulse quickening. "Are you out of your mind?" "I don't think we have a choice," Lila said urgently. "Whatever we unleashed, it's not going to stop until it gets what it wants." Jenna's mind raced, recalling the darkness that had haunted them. But what if it's too late? What if it gets us this time? "We need to confront it," Lila insisted, determination shining in her eyes. "We can't keep running, we have to face it together." Jenna felt a chill run through her. Deep down, she knew Lila was right. The whispers, the laughter, they wouldn't let her go. And the amulet felt heavier in her pocket, a constant reminder that they were tied to the cabin's curse. "Okay," Jenna finally said, her voice steady despite her fears. "But we have to do this right. We need to stick to the rules." Lila nodded, her expression fierce. "We'll follow the rules and we'll end this, once and for all." The following morning, they packed their bags, the weight of their decision hanging heavy between them. The drive back to the cabin felt surreal, the landscape shifting from familiarity to dread. As they approached the cabin, Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the dilapidated structure. It loomed ahead, an imposing figure against the orange sky. "Are you ready?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Jenna admitted, but she stepped out of the car anyway. The air was thick with tension, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. They stood before the door, the rules from their first visit echoing in Jenna's mind. No talking about the past, always stay in pairs. With a deep breath, they opened the door, the familiar creak echoing as they stepped inside. The cabin felt different now, charged with a sense of foreboding. "Let's light the fire," Lila suggested, trying to muster some comfort. As they worked together, the flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow in the oppressive darkness. But the comfort was short-lived. The whispers returned, swirling around them like a storm. "You shouldn't have come back." Jenna's heart raced as she clutched the amulet, feeling its energy surge. "We're here to confront you," she shouted into the darkness. "Show yourself." The air grew heavy and the shadows deepened, but nothing emerged. "Maybe we need to read from the journal," Lila suggested, pulling it from her bag. "It might have answers." As they pored over the pages, they came across a passage that caught their attention. "Only those who dare to confront the darkness can hope to find peace, but beware, the spirits are not forgiving." Jenna felt a shiver run down her spine. What if it wants something from us? What if it's been waiting? Suddenly the temperature dropped and a figure began to materialize in the corner of the room. Jenna's breath caught in her throat as the figure took shape, a haunting visage with hollow eyes and a twisted mouth. "You disturbed my home," it whispered, the voice echoing like a distant memory. Jenna clutched the amulet tightly. "We didn't mean to. We just want to understand." The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "You cannot understand. You must pay for your trespasses." "Pay? What do you want from us?" Lila shouted, stepping forward. "We're here to make things right." The figure's laughter filled the room, chilling Jenna to her core. "You cannot undo what has been done. The land hungers for a sacrifice." Jenna exchanged a terrified glance with Lila. "A sacrifice?" "No, we won't." Before she could finish, the shadows surged forward, swirling around them like a tempest. Jenna could feel their icy touch, pulling her closer to the darkness. "We need to hold on to each other," Lila yelled, grabbing Jenna's hand. They stood together, grounding themselves against the encroaching shadows. "Use the amulet," Lila cried. "It's our only chance." With a surge of determination, Jenna raised the amulet high, its light piercing through the darkness. The figure recoiled, its form flickering as the energy from the amulet radiated around them. "No, you cannot," the figure shrieked, its voice distorted by rage. "Leave us alone," Jenna shouted, focusing all her energy on the amulet. "We're not here to hurt you, we just want to end this." As the light from the amulet grew brighter, the shadows began to recede, the figure faltering. The whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of anger and despair. The figure's eyes narrowed, and it lunged forward, but the amulet's light held it back, forcing it to retreat. "You think you can banish me?" it hissed, its voice laced with fury. "You will pay." "Not if we stand together," Lila yelled, gripping Jenna's hand tighter. "We're stronger than you." Jenna felt a surge of energy flow through her, the warmth of the amulet mingling with the resolve in her heart. "We won't let you control us." With one final push, they channeled their energy into the amulet, the light erupting into a blinding flash. The room shook, the walls trembling as the darkness recoiled. The figure screamed, its form disintegrating into the shadows as the light enveloped the cabin. Jenna and Lila shielded their eyes, the brilliance overwhelming. When the light finally dimmed, Jenna and Lila found themselves standing alone in the cabin, the oppressive weight of darkness lifted. The air felt lighter, and the shadows no longer danced menacingly around them. "Did we do it?" Lila asked, her voice shaky but filled with hope. Jenna looked around, heart pounding. "I think so." The amulet glowed faintly in her hand, a reminder of the power they had harnessed together. But deep down, Jenna knew that the darkness could return if they didn't remain vigilant. "We need to leave," Lila said, taking a deep breath. "We can't stay here any longer." As they stepped outside into the morning light, the cabin seemed to sigh in relief. The woods looked different now, less threatening, almost peaceful. But Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that their actions had merely postponed the inevitable. The laughter still echoed faintly in her mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness they had faced. "Promise me we won't forget," Jenna said, looking at Lila. "We need to tell others about what happened here." Lila nodded, her expression resolute. "We'll make sure everyone knows. We won't let anyone else fall into the same trap." As they drove away, the cabin receded in the distance, but the memories of that night would linger forever. Jenna clutched the amulet tightly, knowing that it represented both their victory and the shadows that still loomed at the edges of their lives. Years passed, and life continued, but Jenna often found herself drawn back to the cabin, its memory etched in her mind. The stories of the haunted woods spread through their town, and whispers of the cabin's darkness persisted, warning others of its cursed legacy. But one stormy night, as she lay in bed, she felt the familiar chill creep over her. The whispers returned, faint but insistent, echoing in the silence. "You cannot escape." Jenna sat up, heart racing. The amulet glowed softly from her bedside table, a reminder that the darkness was never far away. She realized that the true battle had only just begun. With a deep breath, she reached for her phone, determined to gather her friends once more. They would face the darkness together, as they always had. And as the storm raged outside, the shadows danced in the corners of her room, a chilling reminder that the woods still held their secrets, waiting for the next unwitting souls to cross their threshold. The end. For now.